What is the purpose of video games? Having fun? To tell a story? Is it to max out specs and push graphical processing power to the absolute limit? Or is it purely to create and to experiment and see the range and depth of experience we can achieve with the visual interactive medium? Unfortunately, as silly as this may sound, I won't be answering any of these questions in this video. I ask these questions because I want you to have these in mind while watching. Specifically, what are video games to you? What do you play them for? And what do they do for you? What about them matters the most? The reason I ask this is because gaming as a medium and as an industry has come a long way in its surprisingly short lifespan. It's an industry that has grown perhaps faster than any other industry in such short time. We started with games like Tennis for Two, Pong, and Tetris, and now we have Fortnite, Call of Duty, VR chat, and still Tetris. Needless to say, the medium has grown in far more ways than one, and aside from the most surface-level observation of technological advancement, it's clear not all growth has been for the better. And as that growth continues, the detriments and downsides grow all the more with it. Naturally, the graphical improvements are the first thing anyone will see when comparing new games to old. But what people don't see is the behind the scenes of what is required to achieve that higher graphical fidelity. To put it plainly, the focus on graphical fidelity is taking away time and resources and possibilities from other aspects of games, at least in a general sense. For a non-specific and hypothetical but absolutely believable example, and I will provide actual examples later, but want to start with the hypothetical to emphasize exactly what I mean. A full-length AAA game for the PlayStation 2, which came out in the year 2000, could be made in about a year with a team of around 30 people. Comparatively, for the PlayStation 5, which released 2020, a AAA game can have 5 years of development and around 200 developers, and with all that time and all those resources, still be broken at launch, full of bugs, and have only half as much content. But more polygons, better shaders, more particle effects, higher FPS, and all those other buzzwords that make the trailers and commercials look pretty. Now, I'm not saying all PlayStation 2 games launched in perfect form. There, of course, were plenty of unoptimized and subpar games. But imagine what a team of 200 could do if they abandoned the need for the highest graphical fidelity possible. To put things into the context of Call of Duty, for no reason other than I feel it's the simplest and easiest to understand at a glance, but would you rather the next Call of Duty come out with the best graphics you've ever seen in your life, highest polygon count ever achieved in gaming, and with the most realistic dynamic lighting and shading systems possible, among any number of other descriptors to emphasize the standard-setting nature of these hypothetical graphics? But it launches with half the maps, half the weapons, half the game modes, and half the length of the campaign as the previous release, and the performance is horrible for the first 3 to 4 weeks, riddled with bugs and glitches. Or would you rather it launch with literally every game mode that has ever been in Call of Duty, plus more, 3 times the amount of maps, twice as many guns, the longest and most consistently high-quality campaign, and perfect balancing across all multiplayer modes? But the graphics are on par with Black Ops 3. And to clarify, I don't mean the art style or gameplay of Black Ops 3. I mean exclusively the level of graphical fidelity achieved when at max settings on an optimized system. I've seen and heard a number of times all over the internet that AAA gaming is dead or doomed. And while at face value you may be inclined to agree, I would say AAA gaming is not doomed or over. It's just that projects are being mismanaged, and investors and higher-ups are blinded by buzzwords, often regarding the technology, graphical fidelity specifically, and other factors related to surface-level marketability. Skull and Bones being labeled the first quadruple A game, I think is a perfect example of that sentiment, lacking mechanical depth and gameplay variety, but excelling in surface-level appearance and optics otherwise. If an indie team of just 3 people can make Battlebit Remastered, which has more maps, more weapons, more mechanics, more environmental interactivity, more vehicles, better destructible environmental physics, and more stable servers than Battlefield 2042, the latest game in the franchise that is the primary influence for Battlebit, then imagine what a AAA studio with a team of 100 developers and a AAA budget could produce if they sacrificed that need for marketability in visual fidelity and accessibility. Similar to my hypothetical Call of Duty example, the reboot of the Star Wars Battlefront series is the perfect true comparison. The originals, which released on PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox, have more content packed into each of them than most comparable games have since. The first of the reboots, both developed by DICE, the same studio responsible for the Battlefield franchise, released with some of the most jaw-dropping individuals and most cinematic moments in gameplay that can make you feel like you're in the movies better than any other game I've played. And I say that genuinely. And even though it came out almost 10 years ago now, it still looks incredible. And you know what? It absolutely sucked. They completely disregarded the prequel era of Star Wars, meaning it would, by default, be missing approximately half the content of what either of the originals offered, but it was also missing most of the game modes. It didn't have a campaign or story mode at all, no galactic conquest, which was the real selling point of the originals in terms of game modes, and plenty of other features, game modes, and mechanics were completely discarded. It had some additions too, but nothing comparable or enough to replace what was removed. And I wouldn't dare say it softened the blow, not even close. It looks incredible, and it adheres perfectly to perceived mainstream trends at the time, and by that, in the context of Star Wars, I mean prequels equals bad, and in doing so they made a sad, empty shell of what we had before. Luckily, the follow-up to it would remedy some of those issues, but it still was hardly a shadow of what either of the originals were. Dreams of a Star Wars Battlefront 3 do not look like DICE's efforts, at least not to me. For me, the ideal third game could literally have any quality of graphics, but would have even more content than the originals. More game modes, more locations, more options, more characters, vehicles, just more content. Even though the originals make it hard to believe there could be more, since they had so much to offer already. Honestly, it could have the exact same gameplay as the originals, and I would still be happy. Playing games with older graphics, dated only by modern AAA standards, isn't going to kill us. I'll take the originals with all that content over the reboots absolutely any and every day, with no questions asked or hesitation. It isn't the fault of the executives and investors exclusively, although they are certainly the easiest to point fingers at. The other party to blame, naturally, is us, the consumers. We are the ones who keep buying into the marketing. We keep feeding into the hype of new consoles, new graphics cards and software, and the need for the biggest and best systems, and go so far as to use that as bragging rights. I'm not going to use this video as a call to arms to boycott PC parts or certain games, consoles, or companies or anything like that, nor would I ever. Obviously, it is good to support the games and developers and companies you like. If you want to buy every new console generation, or the new Call of Duty every year, regardless of the content and or quality, or lack of, that's great. Genuinely don't stop. Play the games you enjoy on the systems you want, and support them to whatever extent you want and can. Similarly, if you're a gear junkie and always want the most up-to-date build possible, don't stop. Build that tank of a PC and be proud of it. What I am saying is that if you don't want to support those studios or franchises or parts or whatever, don't engage with it, sometimes even if negatively, because any press is good press, right? There are plenty of people online who will see a trailer or some gameplay and complain endlessly about how the graphics are last gen, only to talk later about how older games were so much better because content is king and graphics didn't matter because the games were fun back then. And then they'll go on to brag about having a 4090 and how great it is, and how games need to be built for modern hardware. Think about your priorities and preferences when it comes to games, especially before engaging in discussion about them. Again, if you are a specs junkie, part of the PC master race, and don't care if a game sucks as long as it runs at 260 FPS at 8K, or whatever crazy stats you're aiming for, then boast about those graphics cards and your insane speeds. But if that's your priority, don't also complain when a developer has to cut corners and sacrifice content and resources elsewhere to achieve that. If you're anything like me and are enamored by games made by small teams on basically no budget, and like to hunt down those indie gems, then similarly, keep it up. Highlight them, promote them, show that the gameplay, stories, and mechanics on offer are far more important than the polygon or pixel count or frames or whatever other specs. There are phenomenal games out there, and plenty of them don't get the attention they deserve. All in all, I'm not saying one is right or wrong, or that one is better than the other in any way. It's all up to you and your preferences. And I know my priorities, and if you've seen my 2023 in review video, you should know what side I fall on too. But know what your priorities are and own it. And do your best to not backtrack on those priorities, just to end up going back and forth. If you spend just about any amount of time watching videos about video games, then there's a pretty good chance you've seen at least thumbnails asking things like, are video games getting worse? Or were games more fun? Or am I just getting old? And I think these questions are coming up because, in large part, the identity of what gaming is has changed drastically over time, and the communities around them have changed accordingly, not to mention what younger generations may be introduced to when they start getting into gaming. Competition has always existed in gaming, but there have been significant changes in the sentiment towards competitive gaming. With multiplayer communities becoming more and more competitive by default, and meta builds being such a focus that you'll be criticized for playing the meta and equally criticized for not, even in non-competitive single-player games. For example, when Elon Musk posted his Elden Ring build, he was mostly ridiculed for playing a build that wasn't in line with the meta at the time. If I went into detail on my build, literally at any point in time, I'm sure I'd be mocked too, because I have no interest in the meta or min-maxing. I don't watch build guides. I play my build for what I imagine the same reason Musk plays his, because it's fun. My build may be weak and ignoring a lot of other possible buffs, item combos, and status effect stacking, and I probably could have leveled up more efficiently too. But at the end of the day, it's my build and I have fun, so I don't care. What happened to playing games just to have fun? When Diablo 4 came out, it received almost overwhelming amounts of initial praise, but not much later it devolved into very critical and mostly negative criticism, most of which I've seen comes from established reviewers on YouTube and streamers on Twitch, people who very quickly grinded the game to level 100, theory crafting every possible build, and saying things along the lines of, "It's not good enough. It's a game made for casuals who don't care that much." Or for dads who come home from work and only play an hour or two at a time. Now, I'm definitely not saying games should have less, or should be more casual specifically, but I will ask, is a game being more casual truly a problem? And especially so when that criticism is coming from full-time streamers and content creators. Do all games have to be hyper-competitive and so stat-focused that you're pouring hundreds of hours into them just to get that triple-S god-tier metagamer build? Should games be graded off what full-time players think? People who play for up to 8 hours a day, sometimes months at a time? Most players fall into the demographic of playing for only up to a few hours at a time after work or on weekends, so it only makes sense that it would be the target demographic for game designers. I'm an enjoyer of the YouTube channels Patrician TV and Private Sessions, But during a number of their podcasts covering Starfield, they talk about the positive reviews coming from people who only play a couple hours at a time, and how that's the reason they enjoy it, and go on to describe how they'd play closer to 8 hours each day. I'm pointing them out specifically now, but there are plenty more who have made similar statements. I just so happened to listen to those podcasts a few days before writing this script, and it seems they aren't considering that they're the minority demographic in this particular instance. Not everyone is a full-time streamer or content creator, and not all games should be made for that demographic specifically either. Games like Cult of the Lamb and Baldur's Gate 3 have Twitch integration and viewer interactivity options, which is great for streaming and community play sessions. But the games aren't built from the ground up for a demographic that has 8 hours a day to play their one game. Most people only have a sliver of their day to give to games, and more often than not, that's who games are made for. There's a reason Vampire Survivors and all the clones and roguelikes and roguelites blew up so much and so fast. And it's not just the addictive gameplay loop and constant sense of progression. It's also that you can pick up and play and enjoy it in bite-sized portions. A full round of Vampire Survivors is only 30 minutes. Get a few rounds in and you've been playing for an hour and a half, and more likely than not, that time has flown by, and you'll be satisfied with the gaming session for the day. And the same goes for mobile games. There's a reason mobile gaming has blown up so much in recent years, and it's because most people who want to play games don't always have the time to sit down to commit to chipping away at a 20 to 30 hour campaign or grind away towards a multiplayer level cap. If you can log in, do your dailies, and call it good, then you're good. And that's not even getting into the conversation of monetization, because that's a whole different beast of a topic that I don't want to talk about right now. Not that it isn't relevant or important, but I want to focus more so on full-length or full package, console and PC gaming specifically. Going back to Starfield, I imagine a reason people who only have a couple hours to spare enjoy it more than those who can sink handfuls of hours into it is part of the design. Bethesda has an interesting design philosophy, one that is well-intentioned but doesn't always work as well as intended, and that they never want to say no to the player. This means they never want to hamper the player experience or burden them with potentially cumbersome systems or restrict them from progressing how they want to. While playing Starfield, I started to describe it as a la carte design. By that, I mean you can pick and choose what mechanics you engage with, and which you ignore, and are able to continue to progress through the game, mostly without impact or consequence from those choices. If you don't want to upgrade guns, you don't really have to. You'll find enough higher level gear to be fine. If you don't want to build a base, you don't really have to. There are places to rest for free by progressing the main quest, and other locations you can purchase throughout the game. For someone who is playing 8 hours a day, consistently, racking up hundreds of hours of total playtime, they'll see how disconnected these mechanics are from each other, and how it may harm the immersion or cohesion of the individual elements. For the casual player, getting only a couple hours in a day, they'll probably appreciate not having to engage with things they don't want to, or being able to focus on mechanics they enjoy more while disregarding others, going at their own pace, and not feeling required to engage with mechanics that don't interest them at the time. But they may find them interesting later on in the playthrough, and can start engaging with them at any point they want to during that same playthrough. There's an entire conversation here about RPG game design, modern and accessible versus classic and more intentional or hardcore, but I'm just talking about the game design as it relates to a more casual target audience. Not everyone has the time or the desire to theory craft meta builds, study map layouts, train their aiming at the highest sensitivity settings, or spend 6 hours on one mechanic they don't care about just to get to something else. But those who do often speak the loudest, and it's all too easy to follow suit. The other very common discussion I find is what the role of a video game is, being either a service or a product. Are games made and updated consistently for potentially years after release as a service to the player? Or are they a product that's meant to be purchased, used, and then moved on from to the next? Maybe a combination of both? Fortnite, in many ways, is the pinnacle of gaming as a service. With the free-to-play model and optional paid content, Battle Pass, and microtransactions galore that are in a store that's updated daily. Baldur's Gate 3 is a perfect high-profile example of a game as a product, being released and patched for any remaining bugs and glitches that needed fixing, and only some additional features added after launch, but never costing any more money or asking anything else of the player, at least monetarily, and never providing a roadmap of upcoming content. Recently, the studio head at Larian, the developers, openly stated there would be no DLC for Baldur's Gate 3, at least not from Larian themselves. They had a vision, clear objectives, and they executed. And that was that, and it was excellent. You can look at a lot of single-player focused games like Lies of P or the upcoming Stellar Blade, or just about any smaller story-focused indie game for more examples of that too. Diablo 4 is an example of the in-between. It has that full retail price tag of $70, a full and overall very solid campaign that takes around 30 hours on average to complete, but still plenty of microtransactions, and of course a battle pass, seasonal updates that refresh progression, and is very likely to have DLC in the form of a paid story expansion in the future. So, are games a product, or are they a service? What should they be? Or does it even matter? There's much more I could talk about and plenty more questions I could ask, but I just wanted to throw a couple things out there to get some discussion going. So again, and I'd love to see it in the comments, what is gaming for you? What are the most important things you look for when deciding what to purchase or to add to your wish list, or when you sit down at the end of the day and are deciding what to play? And what types of games do you end up playing the most? Especially if it's different from what you find most important. Maybe you love story-driven games with complex narratives and have been dying to play Baldur's Gate 3 but can't seem to stop playing Minecraft. Or maybe you really like classic arcade-style games like Pac-Man, but all you've been playing lately is Final Fantasy VII, since you can't separate yourself from the characters. Perhaps with the updates to Cyberpunk 2077, you've got your decked-out PC ready to go with maxed-out settings, but maybe you just really want to play Super Metroid again instead. Do you prefer gameplay or story? Or neither, and you just want really good graphics and frame rates? Whatever your position or perspective, I'd love to hear it. So please let me know, and I'd love to hear why. Anyways, thank you so much for watching all the way to the end, and as always, stay happy, stay healthy, and I hope to see you next time.